Okay, so in this tutorial, we are going to learn how to create some basic enemy AI using Bolt. And in doing that, we're going to introduce the idea of a state graph. And what a state graph is a state graph is essentially and let me go ahead and rotate my view here. Here we go. I want to be able to see the turret, is a collection of states that allow for different behaviors. So you might be able to see this on your screen if I zoom in a touch. But right now, this turret is tracking my player, right? So it's currently tracking my player. But once I'm outside of a certain distance, it goes back to a default like scan state. And so we're going to be implementing these things in this tutorial. Now, the tutorial does... For those of you in the course, I have an asset for this tutorial, which is basically the previous tutorial completed so that you have this player that has mouse look and everything else set up. Really, all you need is a player that you can move in the X and Z plane with key buttons. You just need something that can get closer to or further away from this turret that we're creating. The mouse look, because I had that asset already created, I figured that would probably be the best bet. And so before we get started, let's kind of look at what this looks like, and then we'll get into the tutorial. So if I select my turret, which you won't have yet, but you'll note that under my graph, instead of flow graph, it says state graph here. And you'll note that there's this little icon that's a little bit different. And if I scroll down here, you'll see I do have a flow machine attached, but it is not active right now. I just use that to be able to look at the flow graphs that I'm working on and to work on those and then bring them into the state machine. And so then there's the state machine. Note that it can be a macro or an embed, just like a flow graph. And the difference is that it looks like this. And so what these different boxes are these are different states. And these lines with the arrow are the transitions from one state to another. So it's really like, what's the condition that's going to cause scan to move to target lock or target lock to move to scan? And so if I double click on scan, you'll see that inside it's just a flow graph, right? And all it is it's just a flow graph that's doing this scan activity. And if I click on target lock, you'll see again, right, it's just a flow graph. And you'll note that I do have this target lost thing down here, which this is the code that will basically be testing to see if the unit is within range to be targeted. And if it's not, then it's going to trigger the transition back to the scan state. And yeah, so let's go ahead and get started. So to start this, we are going to create a new scene unless you're in the course, and then the entire scene is populated and ready to go with these basic elements. So let's go ahead and get going. So I'm just going to create a basic scene, and I need to create a couple assets here, so I just need to go down and create a plane. And this is something to note in the asset files. This may not be the right size, but make this 10 by 10. So 10 in the X and 10 in the Z, 1 in the Y. And then I just went to my materials and just used something I had previously made. I thought this orange ramp material looked nice, so I've applied that there. And then go ahead and go to your prefabs, or if you've already made the player mouse look object in another scene, you could pull it down into your prefabs, make it a prefab, and then we can just add it to our scene. And I'm just going to go ahead and drop it in my hierarchy. I'm going to zoom out to make sure it's actually on the surface. Now I could rotate this so it's actually facing the center of the world when we start, but it just, it doesn't matter. Let's go ahead and do that. It's going to make life so much easier. So if I rotate this around the y-axis 180 degrees, right? Okay. So now when I start, I'm actually going to be potentially looking at the world. Okay, where is my player? There we go. Now, the only other issue is that I'm in the right position here. I think everything's right, but for some reason, I cannot see myself. So I'm going to select my plane, and yeah, my plane is not at 0. So go ahead and make sure that your plane is 0, 0, and 0. Otherwise, your player may be underneath or floating above or something like that. Okay, so we've got those two things set. So now we need to go ahead and build our turret. And so to do that, we're going to go ahead and create a cylinder. And I'm going to zoom in a bit here, and you'll see that, right, it's not exactly at 0 either. So before I do anything else, I'm just going to click on the 3 dots of my transform component and reset my transform. I'm going to put it 1 in the Y position so it stands up above the surface. I'm going to go ahead and make it 2 in the X and Z, so it's a little bit fatter and looks more turrety. I'm going to leave it set to 1 in the Y. And then I'm going to go ahead and, the last thing I'll do is change the name of the cylinder to turret. Just so it's a little, it's always good to name things earlier rather than later. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create a second cylinder. This will be my barrel, but before I make it a child of the turret, I'm going to make adjustments to the size and things because it ends up scaling in relation to the turret and it becomes kind of a disaster. So first, let's go ahead and just reset everything. Then I know that in the Y, I want it to be 1 unit. I want it to be half a unit. Oops. Can't see that. Half a unit in the X and half a unit in the Z in terms of scale. And I want to rotate this around the Z-axis 90 degrees. And I'm going to leave it set to 1 in the Y right now. Everything else should be good. Let's go ahead and make this a child of my turret. Okay, it's staying the same dimensions, but I want you to note that now it has set my Z to 0.25, my X is 0.5, and my Y is 0.5, right? Because it has set the scaling that I did and it's made it relative to the parent, which is scaled at a different rate. And that could cause us problems down the line, but it shouldn't be an issue for this. So if I set this to 1 in the Y direction, that's going to be a little bit high. Let's do 0.75. Let's just do 0.5. Okay, and then I'm going to make my Y length 1 instead of 0.5, and then I'm going to rotate my view a bit and maybe use the hand tool to bring this over. Yeah, so this is really centered right now, so what I would like to do is move it in the, I guess in the Y direction, just a little bit so the barrel kind of sticks out on one side longer than the other. Now, the reason we're taking the time to do this, and let's go ahead and name this barrel, is that having this object have be able to essentially point is going to be huge. It just makes our life so much easier when we're working on this. Now, something to note, the Z-axis is over here, so let's go ahead and make sure we actually set up our barrel in the right position. So I'm going to make my X position 0 again, and I'm going to rotate this around the X 90 as well. Oops, sorry, around the Y 90 as well. There we go. And then I am going to take and just move this in the Y so that it points out the side here. And now if I click on my turret, okay, this is right, my forward direction is this blue arrow. So when you're building things in Unity, it's important to make sure that everything's aligned with your base object along the forward direction if that's something that you're going to be using, and most likely you will be using that. So the other thing we need to do is, because this player mouse look has a camera in it, you'll note there's a camera over here too. I am going to delete my main camera here because we don't need both cameras. And Unity is going to get really fussy if we try and use both. Okay, so we've got our turret, we've got our player. Let's go ahead and add some components here. So the way that this works is we're going to want to have a state machine on here, but first we're going to want to, and we can do this one way or the other, but let's go ahead and add a flow machine, and then let's go ahead and add a state machine as well. Okay, so I've got my flow machine, I've got my state machine. Now, why would I add both of those? When you're moving back and forth between objects and different views, Unity, the graph always hops back to the top state level rather than maintaining in the flow machine that you're working on. And so I have found that it's easier to create the macro using a flow machine and create the state as though it's the only thing this unit's going to do, and then adding those states to the state machine later. So I'm going to turn my state machine off because we don't need it. With the flow machine, let's go ahead and we're going to start by doing our scan state. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to click New, and we're just going to go to our scripts, and we're going to save this as EnemyAI scan state. Now, I've done this tutorial several times already. The first time I recorded it, the audio was really off and my voice was pitched up and shortened, and I'm not exactly sure how that happened and why that recorded it that way, but this is like my third or fourth time doing it, so that's pretty exciting. I'm really looking forward to doing it one more time. Okay, so I've got my EnemyAI scan state. I'm going to click Edit Graph. And to start with, all right, we need to be able to scan, right? We need to be able to rotate our cannon. And so there's several ways we could do this, but some of the things that we're going to need to consider are, one, we need to have a rate at which that rotation is going to happen. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a object level variable over here, and we're going to call it, I'm going to call it scan speed or scan SPD. It doesn't matter what you name it, because one of the nice things about using Bolt is that you don't have to worry about mistyping variable names because you only type it in once. So the value, let's go ahead and start this at 50 as our speed. So I'm going to pull this down in here because I know we're going to need to get that speed. Something, right, there's this set of things that you may have noticed in every tutorial, right? We're going to need a speed. We're probably going to need time delta time, and we're probably going to need to multiply those together. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to say time.de, right? And again, as always, time delta time basically just makes sure that the speed remains the same across multiple platforms. All right, so I am going, or if you have weird crap going on in the background, like your computer decides to update something while you're playing the game, it's not going to make your speed do crazy things. So so now I need a mult, and we can just do this in generic. We can multiply those two together. Okay, so we've done that. So then what we need is we're going to need to know really our current position, our current rotation, and then we're going to add the number, right? This is in the end a number of degrees per frame is what we're creating. And so what we need to do is we want to add that on and then set our rotation. And we're going to use the global rotation value, I believe, for this. So let's go ahead and add unit. And we're going to say transform.rotation, and we're going to say get. And this is a quaternion, so we need to we're going to need to pull this apart, because really we just want to be adding this, right, this rotation, oops. This rotation is going to be happening, right, around the y-axis, right? And so that's the only thing we really want to add any rotation to. So let's go ahead and start by pulling out the Eulers. So if I, or the, however you pronounce that, I probably say it wrong. But we're going to get the Euler angles, and then from that, we're actually just going to get the y value. And we are going to then take this y value and we're going to add whatever we've created here onto that. So we're going to click on this, we're going to click here, we're going to go to add, we're going to drag this value in here. And then we just need to go ahead and set our rotation. And so it's kind of funny, we expand, we get down to y, and we're going to feed it back in. So we're going to say, the first thing we're going to type in is quaternion, and we want Euler, and we want the XYZ, right? Because we just want to feed this into our Y value. We don't want any rotation in the X or the Z for this object. And then we are going to take this, we're going to right click, we're going to say transform.rotation, although I spelled rotation wrong, so rotation. And we are going to say set, right? And then we'll just pull our quaternion in here. And now we can, we could connect our flow here, but, ideally we just sneak it in here. And let's go ahead and see if this rotates the way we want it to. And so initially with this, we're going to have this rotate, right? The way we've set this up, it should rotate all the way around the circle, right? It should just be a smooth, linear rotation as the turret moves around the circle. Now, one of the things that we may want to do instead is to have this confined to a certain range of degrees, right? So you can imagine if this turret was, positioned on a map in a corner, and you only wanted it to be able to rotate 90 degrees rather than, 180 or 360 or whatever, or you want to be able to adjust that. And maybe that's part of the challenge of the game is based on, where these things can and cannot see or can and cannot reach. Now, we do have it, the way I've designed this tutorial, once it's tracking you, it can track you in 360 degrees, and I have not, stopped that, but that's something that ideally you could then take what we've learned in this tutorial and implement later. Okay, so let's go ahead and stop this. And so what we need to do is let's go ahead and start trying to confine our range. Now, if we're going to confine our range, we're going to need a top end and a bottom end of that range. And so let's go ahead and create two more object variables. One is going to be top, and that will be a float. And let's set the top to 90. And one is going to be bottom. And we will set the bottom to as a float as well, and we'll leave it at 0. Now, with this, with these top and bottom values, these are something we could adjust. The way that this will work, you can't go below 0, right? Because what I'm trying to avoid in this tutorial is adding all of that additional code that's required for when you roll over. And we did previously create a super unit in one of the earlier tutorials that would handle that rollover. And if you want to implement that, that's fantastic. But there's no reason why we couldn't set the original rotation of this object, the forward direction, wherever we want it to be in order to get that 90-degree range to fit where we want it to go. In this case, we're just going to try and keep this as simple as possible because there's a lot to learn already. Okay, so we've got our top and bottom value. So obviously one of the things we need to do is we're going to need to be testing against these values. Now, there's many different ways that we can implement this. The way that I've chosen to do it that seems to be the least number of units and the smallest headache is just to use a conditional like greater than or less than, and to use the branch to determine when to do greater than or when to do the less than. But first, let's think about how we're going to rotate in the opposite direction. Right now, we're moving in a clockwise direction continuously. So if we want to move in counterclockwise, right, what unit should we change? Obviously, you're not going to answer me because I'm talking to myself in a room. but the unit we would want to change is this add, right? Everything else is going to remain the same, except we want to have this be a subtract, right? Because if we're subtracting this number of degrees, then we're going to be moving in the opposite direction, right? And it will be fine with subtracting and then flipping over to 360 and so on. So let's go ahead and copy all of this code and move this down. And these are going to be our two main branches. And then it'd be nice if I could just replace this, but it always gets really upset when you try and do that. So I'm just going to say add unit and type in sub, go down to subtract and generic will be fine. I'm going to connect these two here and connect this output here. And then, oops, I missed one. But let's just go ahead and delete this. And then we'll actually attach that where it's supposed to go. Okay, so now I have these two things. Now, if I ran this right now, because there's these two update events, these two things would be trying to happen at exactly the same time, and the outcome would be bizarre. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on this flow so that we can just test and make sure the bottom half is working. It should rotate the opposite direction. Okay, so it is rotating the opposite direction. Fantastic. So now let's implement the choosing which direction to rotate. Okay, so I'm going to double click. So I've got my two things. Now I'm going to go ahead and disconnect update from here as well. And so, right, I want to be updating this, but what do I need to be testing for in order to choose which direction I want to go? Well, let's go ahead and create our branch, because we know that we need a branch to direct the flow in one direction or the other. So I'm going to say add unit, type in branch, select my branch. And so let's just say if whatever the case is true, we're going to do this set of actions. And if this is false, we're going to do this set of actions. And so let's go ahead and just connect our update here. Right? So what's this condition? So let's go ahead and set this up. So I'm going to say, let's start with our right motion, right? Let's say, okay, so we're going to say if it's greater than, right, this is going to be true, sorry, if it's less than a certain value. Sorry, not greater. Let's go ahead and hit delete. And let's fix this. Let's say if it's less than or equal to, and what value do we want it to be? Less than or equal to? We want that value to be the top, right? We want it to be less, if it's less than or equal to 90, which for some reason does not want to, there we go, pull, right? So if it's less than or equal to 90, and then what value are we testing, right? What we're testing is our y value, right? And we can test that even before we do this final addition, right? So if we come into this and even before we get to this rotation, we find that it's less than or equal to, then we're going to want to switch, or sorry, if we find that it's greater than 90, then we're going to want to switch directions. So let's go ahead and just do this and see what happens. Because I want you to note that we're not going to, there's some things that are, going to happen here that aren't going to be pleasant, and we don't have a way for it to get back to the other side yet. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. Okay, so it works to here. Oh, and then it hits the end, and now it's twitching back and forth. So why is it twitching back and forth? Well, what's happening is, right, it's saying, okay, this value is, 89 or, 90. It's like a little over 90. Oh, that means it's false. So we're going to switch back here. It's going to move a little bit back. So then suddenly it is actually less than or equal to 90. And then it's going to say, oh, I can go, I can go forward again. It's going to go forward, hit that thing. And now it's just jiggling back and forth between those. So just having that conditional isn't enough. what we really need to do is we need to have the conditional, and we need to tell it, we need to have a flag that gets set when that conditional is met, right? And what a flag is it's basically what we need to do is we need to say, oh, this is true. Then we need to set this variable to say it's true. And we need another condition in here that says, basically, if this is true and this value is true, then do this. And then the other case is if that's not true and the flag is false, then we want to do the other thing. So let's go ahead and get that working. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a flag, and this is going to be an object. Well, this could be a graph variable or an object variable, but let's make it a graph variable, and we're just going to call it dir flag, right? Direction flag, and this is going to be a bool. And let's go ahead and start it out as true by checkmarking the value checkbox. Right, so what we want to do before we get anywhere in here at all, the very first thing we're going to want to do with update is we want to check the direction flag. So I'm going to bring my direction flag in here, and what I want to do is I'm going to need another branch. I'm going to go ahead and select my branch. I'm going to copy and paste it. What I need to say is, if my direction flag is true, then I want to do this activity. If my direction flag is false, then I want to do this activity. I'm going to go ahead and delete these as well, right? So if this is true, I want to do this. So then how do I set this to true or false? That's where this other less than or equal is going to come into play. So I'm going to say, you know, if, right, the angle is, and this is where I should make this greater than. Let's change this around. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to see if I can just replace this with greater, or if it's going to give me a bunch of things. So I'm going to say, let's just say if it's greater than, awesome, there you go, perfect. So if the angle, our current angle is greater than our top angle, then what do we need to do? If that's true, what we need to do is we need to set our direction flag to false. So we're going to go ahead and come over here. We're going to hold down Option. And actually, I found that if a unit's selected, then sometimes this doesn't work, but I'm going to hold down Option, click and drag, release the mouse. There we go. And so what I'm going to say is I'm going to have my flow come here. And right, so if this is true, I want this to be false. So I'm going to go ahead and just create a bool literal and leave that little empty, that box empty. And then what needs to happen here is this branch needs to be fed in it can either happen after this rotation or before this rotation. It doesn't really matter. Just because it seems like it'll fit nicely, I'm going to go ahead and drop this in here. Now you'll note that if I do this, it's only going to be trying to update this now if it's true. What I need to do is I need to say if it's false, I also want to do this, right? Because when this is false, I still want this to be continuing. So let's go ahead and connect both of those out, because no matter what, we want to transform our rotation, right? But just when this is true, we want to make this false. So now if we think about this logic, and I know this graph's getting messy, we'll clean it up in a bit. But if we think about this logic, right? So we have our degree, we start out with this being true, right? So we come in here, we say update, we say the direction flag is true, so we're going to come through here, we check this, you know, because we've just started this, our angle is definitely less than our top value, so this is false, so it comes up here, so we start rotating. We rotate, 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 until this gets to be, say, 91 degrees, which is then greater than. So then we come through here, and it's like, oh, now this is true. So let's set our direction flag to false, and then we'll update our rotation one more time, which doesn't really matter. Then when we come back through this update, we're going to come here, and it's going to say, oh, our direction flag is false. That means we need to come down and do this set of steps. And so with this set of steps, we just need to go ahead and take these few objects and recreate this. So I'm going to select my direction flag. I'm going to select this branch. I'm going to select this get variable and this greater than, and I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste all of those and drag them down below here. Okay, now it might make more sense to have these all linked together so that that logic that's changing is in the center. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of these units. I'm going to go ahead and pull this down a touch. Select all of these units, bring them back up. Dismiss this reminder. There we go. And okay, so I've got these set up here. So now what do I need to reconnect in order to make this make sense? Well, first, I want to take this greater, and I actually am going to want this to be less than, right? Because if this gets down to 0, this side is going to be checking to see if it gets to 0. So I'm going to say replace, and I'm going to say less. And I'm going to say less than or equal to, in this case, and instead of checking against the top, I want to check against the bottom. So I'm going to switch my variable that I'm checking there. And then, right, again, I just need to grab this angle out of here, and that's what we're going to be testing. All right, so we test that. It comes up here, and it says, okay, if this is true, we need to come through here and set our direction flag. So let's go ahead and do a bool literal. And in this case, right, we'd set it to true, so it bounces back to the other side of our graph. And the other thing that will obviously need to happen is we need some flow through here. And we need whether this is true or false, we want to be setting our transform. So now let me go ahead and pull this up because, right, we want this false branch to actually go down here, not all the way to our transform. So let's go ahead and fix this. So the flow is going to come in here to check, right? For step 1, check our stuff. Step 2, maybe set our variable. And step 3, set our rotation, right? And even if we don't set our variable, we still want to set our rotation. Okay. So now this may work. Let's go ahead and give it a go and see what happens. And then we will clean this graph up. Okay, so here we go. So, oh, there it goes. It bounces back. Oh, something's wrong with our logic. So let's go ahead and see where we messed up down here. We've got one half working really well. Let's go ahead and see where did I make a mistake. Now this is the point where the graph's a little bit messy, so I just need to see what's going on. So we come through, we branch successfully here, we set our direction flag, everything's happy. If we come through here, if our bottom is less than or equal to our top, let's go ahead and see what's going on here. I'm going to go ahead and run this, and we can watch this whole graph take place. So it's going, and then it flips, and then it's saying it's always false. And you'll note that the issue is that that if you can see it on your screen at least, that when we get down to 0, it's actually switching to 360 degrees, which means that we hit 1 and then we never actually get to 0, right? It's actually saying, right, this value is 0, but this other value that we're getting out, which I can't really see very well, is somewhere in the 300s. It never actually hits 0. It just hops on over. So let's go ahead and change our bottom value to 1. And if you wanted to keep it at 90 degrees, we could make it the top value 91 if you want to. But I'm going to leave this at 1 because, right, this becomes problematic when it gets below 0. So let's go ahead and see if this is more effective. Okay, it goes through, goes through. Ah, even without seeing it work, I can see it work, right? Now it's up top. Uh-oh, now both are running. And now we're stuck. Oh, and now it's going back. So there's still some problem. Now, what that problem likely is that our speed and the number of degrees that we are getting out of this, right? So if I come down here to our speed, what's happening is that occasionally this value is likely greater than 1, or enough so that when we go in here, we're actually hopping over that value, right? And so sometimes it's hitting us, it's hitting right, and sometimes it's not. So how do we deal with this? Well, let's go ahead and just set our range a little bit differently again. Let's go ahead and see if we can make some modifications that would help. If I make this even just a little bit bigger than 1, if I make this, 2, let's see if we get a better reaction. Okay. Okay, this seems to be working much, much better, right? And that's based on the speed. Now, there may be, it may be something where we, there's other ways we could solve this, but this is a really simple way to solve it. And we can just say, yeah, let's just go, honestly, does it matter if it's going 88 degrees rather than 90 degrees? If it does matter, there's other things we can do. You could always set this off 2 further degrees. We could change the way that we're doing our check. We could implement that rollover. But right now, this is going to work really well for what we're doing. So I just want to double click, and I'm going to watch it go as well, right? So that's not working at all. Okay, so I made a mistake, and it was still spinning all the way around the circle. And the issue was, and I don't know what I did differently in the previous, in my previous implementation of this, but I did have these this set variable connected in to set the rotation. However, for whatever reason, and it may be the speed, maybe I set the speed to a different rate, having the direction flag setting here go back and set the rotation is causing problems, right? It's making it so that it actually ends up leaping over the end, specifically on this side, so that the value becomes greater than 0, and then it freaks out and doesn't know what to do. So let's go ahead and delete these 2 flows. And so if we're setting, if this is wrong, we never set that up. If the flag is getting set, we don't set the rotation, right? And if I do that and I go ahead and hit play and actually double click to shrink this so we can see the turret go. So let's double click, right? So now watch, it'll bounce back and forth the way that we want it to bounce. If for some reason yours is not, you could check your bottom value. I might make this a 1. Oops. That might have just totally messed it up. We'll see. We'll see what happens when it comes back around this way. Oh no, it worked. Great. And let's see if it keeps working. It's just when I was updating it, it freaked out because the value was undefined probably for a bit. Oh no. So you'll see this 1 is problematic. If I make it a little bit, even a little bit bigger, like 1.5, we'll see if that fixes the problem. No, it seems to be going forever now, so let's make it 2. And see if we can, okay. So for whatever reason, 2 seems to be the bottom value that I can do with the speed set to 50. So if I want this to rotate slower, I could probably have a lower value there. And again, if I want this to be 90 degrees instead of 88, I could always add 2 degrees here. Okay, now something else I could do is I could always add a couple degrees to this 0 value in here so that the bottom end of the range is actually the bottom end of the range, but I make some more adjustments with math and things in here, but I'm not going to worry about that right now because we have this thing rotating. So this is our scan state. So let's go ahead and save it. In the next section, we will, okay, so let's go ahead and stop this. Let's save it. I have not saved the scene yet, so I'm going to call this, I'm going to go down to my scenes. And you can call this, you know, EnemyAI state graph, you know, or whatever you want to call it. I'm going to add demo afterwards because I just want to make sure I know which one I'm working on. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually add this to a state graph. So we've got our flow machine. And so let's go ahead and turn our flow machine off. And then we're going to come down here. And what I'd like to do is we're going to turn our state machine on. And currently, right, I can't click edit graph because we have no state machine. So let's go ahead and create new. And we'll just call this EnemyAI states. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to go to scripts and I will save this. And you'll see that now I have this start state that says on enter state, on exit state, and update. And the start state is the default state, right? Right now it's named start, but we can call this scan state pretty easily. And if we double click on this, we'll open up the flow graph for the state. And you'll note that there's update, on event, enter, on enter state, and on exit state, right? So we can do things that when we first come in, we can do things right before we leave, and then we can do things, you know, every frame like we've done previously. So what I need to do is I need to take the graph that I've created here and I need to paste it into this other area. So I'm going to click edit graph. I'm going to come up here. I'm not going to need my start state or this update up here. I'm going to move those off to the side. I'm just going to click and grab all of this stuff. I'm going to copy it. And then I'm going to go back and click edit. I'm going to double click to come in here. I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to make the screen really large. And I'm going to move this off center so that when I paste, it's not in the way. And then I'm going to delete this update because I've already got it in here. And I'm going to organize this a little bit better. So, right, this is all my like clockwise rotation, which if I really wanted to, I could, you know, group all of these as separate things. But this is right, you know, really, this is my logic here. So maybe we, right, we can pull these a little bit closer. So that we know where our logic is. And then we've got our, right, our counterclockwise rotation. And so we could make subgroups for all of these things, or we could just make one big group. I'm going to go ahead and just make one big group so it's a little bit easier to see. So I'm just going to click and drag with command held down. And I'm going to call this scan. Right, so this is the activity that we're doing. I'm going to change this color to maybe green. Okay, and I'm going to save this. So we've created our first state. And now if I have this flow machine turned off and I have this state machine turned on, if I just go ahead and hit play, it should do exactly what we were doing before. Now, if not, it's going to just give me an error because I'm missing a variable or something. And so you'll see I have an error. So let's go ahead and open this up. And it's saying that there's this one variable, this graph variable that doesn't exist, right? And so that's because, right, as this, I used a graph variable that was only local to that EnemyAI scan state macro that I created. So what I need to do is come up here and I just need to say graph. And I can create a graph variable the same way that I create a graph variable in a flow state. So I just come up here and I say dir if flag plus make it a bool and set it to true like we did previously. And now if I run this, it should fix this. Okay, and there we go, right? We've got our default state set to go, and we're ready to create another state and then create transitions between them. And we will do that in the next tutorial.